Welcome back to the second episode of the Legion's Initiative podcast. I'm joined once again by my delightful podcast co-host, Kristen. Kristen, how are you today?
I'm good, PJ. I'm good. If it's the second, does that divide down to 1.5?
I think it might.
Yeah, so this is it's the second official episode, right?
Right. We're considering the first one the pilot episode.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, today we'll be looking at the past year of Magic and Commander products, and we'll be following the standard rotation cycle, which means we'll be looking at cards from Guilds of Ravnica, Ravnica Guild Kits, Ravnica Allegiance, War of the Spark, Core Set 2020, Commander 2019, and Modern Horizons. We will not be talking about the Brawl Precons and Throne of Eldraine.
So we're looking at cards that have come out in the last sort of cycle, right?
Right.
The people will want to be thinking about when it comes to like prices and things like that, because the rest of the stuff's already rotated, right?
Right. And so the way we're going to do this, instead of just going through every set, we have a couple of categories of cards, and we picked out some of the things that we think fit best into these categories.
We thought we'd try something different rather than go through every single set and make it a really long, drawn-out process. We're going to look at a few sort of questions or ideas about cards that have come out in the sort of last year, sort of 12 months or so. We're going to not obviously cover everything, so if there is something that we do miss, it's not necessarily that we don't know it exists or that we don't necessarily think it's good. It's just, there's only so much time in the day, right?
Right. Before we get going on that, there's a few little things I want to talk about first. First is shout out to Guilds and Ravnica Allegiance for the Shockland reprints.
Yeah, it's always nice when we go back to Ravnica for those reprints. They're the backbone of this format for many people. Just having those basic land types is great, and we always need more in supply. The one thing that I'm a little bit sort of apprehensive about this new Pioneer announcement is that Shocklands probably are not coming down again.
Yeah, and I didn't really pick any up in this last cycle, so I think they're already getting more expensive than I'd like them to be. And I'm kicking myself a little bit for not trading for them when they were a bit cheaper.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a busy year, hasn't it, for announcements? Because we've also had the banned list updates.
That we did. A lot of people, ourselves included, had a lot of feelings about the ban list changes with Iona and Paradox Engine being banned. Funny enough, our first podcast was like the morning that happened when we filmed, and so it was like super fresh in our minds. Hadn't even had time to process everything that had happened, but
it was crazy. We sat down with a plan. We're like, right, this is what we're gonna do. And then literally, as we were setting up the microphones, the news dropped, and we were like, okay, new plan.
The plan is gone. The plan has been tossed in the dumpster, and
let's wheel it away and get a fresh 7.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, a lot of people had a lot of feelings about that. I think there were a lot of interesting questions that came out of that process. Questions about what goes on with the ban list and how cards are picked. And I think it was a lot of just interesting discussion. Just as a quick aside, I saw Shivam speak. He's on the advisory group at GP Vegas. And he did talk about the fact that, cards like Cyclonic Rift were heavily discussed amongst the group. And, they ultimately decided to keep Rift. But he talked about with Iona is that he said he gets to play Commander once a week. And if he gets Iona locked in a game, that's one game out of the maybe 3 or 4 that he gets to play where he doesn't get to do anything. So I understand his point of view. It makes me very sad that Iona got banned, but I understand where he's coming from. And seeing him speak about it, I thought he had a lot of great points. And it did feel like they do have a lot of insight about the direction that the format should be going in.
Yeah, I agree. The Iona ban does raise some interesting issues about precedent and other cards that are similar, which does sort of suggest that they are probably looking at these cards already.
Right.
And I think the most exciting thing for me is that the new Command Fest events that have come out of the hugely successful Command Zone at Vegas, there's such an opportunity there for the rules committee and the advisory group to really interact with the player base, and I really hope that becomes a thing.
Yeah, and I thought that was the best part. So, the written statement that was put out by Sheldon didn't do a lot for me to ease any of my tensions. Seeing Shivam speak, and there was another gentleman, he was actually on the rules committee who was present. I can't remember his name. But actually seeing them speak about it made me feel much more at ease than all the written statements that were put out. So to your point of, them interacting with people, I think is going to be better than just, whatever written statement they put out. But
That's true of most mediums, though, right? Whether it's a
right.
magic game or politics, God heaven forbid. um, yeah. So one final thing that I thought we'd go over before we get on to our sort of headline topics.
Yeah.
What did you think of Commander 2019?
I love Commander 2019. I think all of the commanders in the set are really sweet. Like, there's a wide range of things that you can do. To me, they all feel pretty strong. Like, none of them feel just like bad. Like, it's like you can't make this work in any way. Obviously, there's some are going to be stronger than others, but I feel like they all have enough inherent power that you can play them somewhere. And I think the designs were just really, really good, really exciting, and just gives a lot of fresh options for some colors that maybe needed them, like red, black was one. I think the Jeskai, I think Promicon was a really sweet card. And just they were all really, really cool. So I really liked the commanders in 2019. I know you've spent a lot of time looking at a lot of the cards in the 99. What did you think about Commander 2019?
So I think that there were some real hit card designs in the set. I think that all of the sort of commanders, the legendary creatures, they were all very well designed, and I think they opened up a lot of design space that we've been either wanting or didn't know we wanted. I think some of the cards in the 99 were also good. I think the main disappointment for me that makes it like not the greatest product of the Commander series is the reprint equity and some of the, like, dare I say, chaff that they included in these decks. It kind of turned me off. Like, and also the fact, like, it's just the fact that the Elsha deck had so many lands in it. It's like you could not play Elsha as the commander out of the box without adjusting things. Like,
Yeah, I did hear that. I did hear that.
so as much as I think it did a lot of good things, I think there were a couple of misses too, which means that I think it falls probably below like 16 and 17 for me, but above 18.
Yeah, and that's definitely the same thought that I was having. Probably not as good as 16 and 17. I mean, those sets were crazy. Definitely way better than 18. And I was trying to think back further a little bit. There was definitely some cool stuff in the older precons, but I don't know. For me, it might be in third place. I think there's just a lot of really cool things to build around. And maybe it's because we had that off year in 18, it just feels that much more exciting to get a bunch of new cards that are really fun to look at and play with.
Yeah, I think that probably contributes to it somewhat. But I also think we can't really sort of discuss this without discussing that the Brawl precons did steal some equity from these products when it comes to reprints and also cool cards, I guess.
Right. I assume you're talking about Arcane Signet.
Yeah, that's the main one. But also, like, like the Jeskai deck could have easily had a Smothering Tithe in it.
That's true. That's
Just
true.
there's plenty of like opportunity to put those cards into other decks, is what I'm saying. Shocklands or any of the land, I guess. That would have been nice.
Yeah. yeah, those would have been nice.
So yeah, shall we move on to the meat of the topic?
Yeah, let's get going. First category we've got is most hyped, and we're gonna pick one or two from each set.
Sounds like a plan.
So first one we've got on here is Assassin's Trophy.
Yeah, this card is sweet. Like, it does everything that you want to do in a removal spell. Like, it destroys a permanent for 2 mana. Like, that's nuts. You don't need anything better than that. I think the card was very obviously going to see Commander play. I think a lot of us were hoping that it would go down in price, but then it started to see play in Modern. And now it's definitely a mainstay of Pioneer. So I think the days of picking up a cheap one of these are well and truly gone. And it most certainly did live up to the hype.
Yeah, it's a multi-format all-star. And, as great as it is, like, giving someone a land is still a drawback and something you need to be mindful of, especially early in a game of Commander.
Yeah, you don't want to fire this off really quick.
There are definitely things I don't want blown up, but on occasion, I am happy to just take the land. I'm like, well, I guess it's a rampant growth now. So,
right. And I think that, you have to be conscious as well of fixing your opponents if they're missing colors.
right. But very hyped card, very sweet card. Moving on from that, the next one is a card that, man, I've talked about this thing a lot on my channel. Smothering Tithe.
Ah, this card.
Yeah, this card. What else can you say?
I mean, as soon as I saw it spoiled, I was just like, Give me 20.
Yep. I should have bought 20 because they got pretty expensive.
Yeah, I should have got a foil as well, to be honest. But
They were cheap and then they weren't.
yeah, I should have got a foil as well, to be honest. But this card had a lot of hype for Commander, and it's interesting because I think in most of the sets in recent history that are standard, there hasn't been a standout card that has held such a high price just for Eternal formats than Smothering Tithe. Like, when I say Eternal formats, I mean more Commander rather than like Legacy or Modern or whatever. Most of the cards that see play in Commander do also see some Standard or Modern play.
Right.
And Smothering Tithe is just not a card that sees any play in Standard or any other format. And it's held a price. It's holding Ravnica Allegiance.
Right. You're talking about a rare from a modern set that is mass produced that has been bouncing between like 8 and 12. I haven't looked at it recently, but that jumps out at me too. Most standard legal rares that are only Commander playable don't hold that kind of price tag.
Exactly. Like the next one from the set that we thought was pretty hyped
is Teysa Karlov.
Yeah, like that's a great example. Like the card is similarly hyped, but it's not got anywhere near the price tag of Smothering Tithe.
It does not. Teysa Karlov is 94 cents out of the same set. You've got a hyped commander that is a rare that is not even $1 versus Smothering Tithe that's like around $10. Just insane. Now, I get it, Smothering Tithe can go in like more decks than Teysa, but still.
Yeah, usually when this legendary creature at least holds a bit more value than that.
Right. Although a lot of times legendary creatures is usually mythic and she's not a myth. Could be.
That's true. But yeah, I think she was like definitely the most hyped from Ravnica Allegiance. There were many people I saw snap built that deck as soon as she was printed.
Yeah, and when that came out, I got a lot of questions about when are you building Teysa Karlov? When are you building Teysa Karlov? So definitely a lot of hype around that one. Moving on from there, War of the Spark had probably, I guess I would say the most hyped, or at least the most hype that appealed to me and got me hyped with Feather the Redeemed. What are your thoughts on Feather?
So like Feather, like I'll come out and admit straight away, it's not for me. It's not something that I want to do. Not really my play style. But I will say that it does show that R&D are trying with Boros generals and trying new things, and I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, and I've spent like a lot of time thinking about Feather and Feather builds and this and that. It's an interesting commander. There's a bunch of different ways to go with it. The question is, for the type of build that you're playing, how badly does your commander need to stay in play? And that's been like a big question mark for that deck. But it's been a really interesting puzzle trying to put all the pieces together for Feather and like figuring out, what kind of play style I really want to be playing with that deck.
For sure. And I think the nice thing as well is that for a budget, you can make a very competitive list that is probably going to have a higher chance of contending with the more broken levels of Commander, just because it has such a great card draw engine with all the cantrips and all the protection.
Right. The top end of that deck is pretty powerful and can put a very fast clock on your opponent. I guess what I was trying to say is that it's not a card that's quickly solved. Like, you need to look at it for a while and really figure out what you want to be doing.
I've seen some suboptimal builds of Feather.
Yeah, there's a lot of those going around too. One other thing I wanted to mention about Feather is that it was so hyped, it pushed the cost of Sunforger from like $1.50 to $10 for a little while. It's come back down, but people really got a good glimpse at just how strong Sunforger can be. And for a brief minute there, it was a pretty expensive Magic card for a card that sees like not a ton of play and has been printed 3 times.
That's a great point, to be honest, because when you look at these hyped cards, they do have a really swingy effect on the secondary market. Smothering Tithe did push up the price of some of the wheels. Taser did push up the price of a lot of the aristocrat stuff. So, it has an effect. This set had a lot of hype in it. I think the hype machine kind of went into overdrive for Bolas' Citadel.
Yeah.
Enables so many decks.
Yeah, it really does.
Whether we think it was needed or not is another thing, but it's bloody fun to play with.
Oh yeah. That's the thing. It's hyped and it's fun. Like it's a fun card. It's strong and I don't want to say it's overpowered. I don't want to say it's underpowered. It's definitely strong and fun. It can lead to combos but doesn't have to. So, really really interesting card. Also like ask the question is what's your life total worth?
Right, because I see this card come down late game for a lot of decks and doesn't really do anything. So I think to really take advantage of it, you need to be able to tutor it out.
Right. Once you start getting below like 15 or 20 life, cards costing life, it's a big deal. If you're at like 7, there's probably a lot of things you can die to on board. So,
Right. There's, I think, probably like 2 more main cards that I think were the most hyped from this set. I think the Nyssa Planeswalker, Nyssa Who Shakes the World, is, I mean, it's a mana doubler. Like, what more needs to be said?
yeah,
Like,
mana doublers are good.
if you're a taller head on board, this card does so much work, and just getting the bodies as well with your lands with the counters.
Yeah, one thing that
It's
I've
a great
noticed
card.
when I've seen it, there aren't tons and tons of direct ways to destroy a planeswalker. Any given deck may have like 2 or 3, which is going to be way less than the number of ways you can destroy like other permanent types. And a lot of times when I see Nissa, it would just be easier to blow up a Cage Sun or blow up some other artifact or enchantment mana doubler. With a green deck, a lot of times there's a lot of creatures on the ground and you can't get to that planeswalker super easily. So I do see
Right.
it stick, and it's a thorn to try and get rid of it.
Yeah, and the other thing is as well, like you usually see it stick in decks that have ways to untap lands. So like Simic decks that will have access to Kiora or Garruk.
Yep.
Um, and then if you're dropping Nissa and being able to then untap lands and tap them for double, like that opponent's snowballing.
Right. It gets out of hand quickly. It's a very strong card.
I guess the other one that was like, I guess super hyped was Casualties of Law because it just does a lot.
Yeah, this card's pretty ridiculous. It's like Decimate, but better.
Yeah, I definitely like think we picked the right category for it though. I think it is definitely the most hyped. It's weird. Whenever I see it cast, it's at a stage of the game where it's either dismantling the arch enemy or it's just taking a random permanent off each player, which doesn't really impact the board as much. Which is an interesting one because sometimes there won't be an arch enemy, and when you're casting that, you've got to be really careful that you're just not making too much of an enemy of someone else.
Yeah, I seem to be the player who always gets the land blown up for some reason, and that's incredibly painful. And maybe it's a product of I'm too far ahead and people really want to knock me off the throne, but oh, when you focus like 2 or 3 modes of that card at a single player, that player is like probably close to out of the game, or they can go from like ahead to very far behind. It is painful
Yeah.
to
So unless you're casting it at the arch enemy, it's very hard to choose targets for, because if you just over target one of the players and they have something with your name on it in their hand, like you might get blown out. Like you might become the casualty of war.
yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And I don't know, like I've been hit by a number of decimates in my life and they feel bad. Casualties of War feels even worse for some reason.
Right. I guess we should move on to Modern Horizons. So Modern Horizons. This is a set that, like, if it wasn't coming fresh off the tails of War of the Spark, like this set would have had so much hype. It still had a lot, but I think people were dead by the time this came out.
Yeah, there's definitely starting to be like hype fatigue.
Mhm.
The adrenal fatigue is real. And yeah, there's a lot of really cool things in Modern Horizons, but coming off the back of War of the Spark, I think it probably did get a little bit lost.
I think there's also something to be said for the fact that Modern Horizons kind of had something for everyone, so the hype was kind of spread out.
Yeah.
You had a lot of sort of cool cards for Legacy and Modern, so there was a lot of hype there. And then for Commander, a lot of the hype was over some of the tribal cards, like the Sliver stuff, which, that's a very select type of player that's going to get hyped about those things, right?
Right. One thing I want to point out is that I do feel a little bit bad for modern players because there was a lot of commander stuff in there and there were cards for other formats that weren't modern. So I thought it was branded just a little bit weird being a modern set that, has obviously a number of modern playable things, but also had a lot of stuff for other formats too. So
Mm.
maybe to some degree, modern didn't get all of the things that they necessarily wanted.
I think particularly like early on, I think that was probably a fair assessment. I think as time's gone on and you've seen the impact that this set has had on Modern as a format, it's definitely still a Modern set. I think a lot of people were jokingly calling it Commander Horizons at first, so I think the truth is somewhere in between. But I think it's definitely tilted now towards being more of a Modern set than it did initially.
Right, and the modern bans have probably helped that along a little bit as well.
But yeah, Modern Horizons. There are two standout cards though that I think had the most hype for Commander. The first of which is obviously Ursa, right?
Right. So, I mean, for like, I don't know, 2 straight months, just everything I heard about was Ursa. Ursa, Ursa, Ursa. And it's strong. I don't think it's as strong as everyone thought it was going to be, at least for commander play.
Yeah, I think that the people that are really going to push Ursa to the limits are probably going to be playing in a play group where the decks are equally powerful. And I think that running Ursa as a commander, if you're not going all in on it, is probably not where you want to be.
Right.
Because I mean, he's just the latest in a line of really great blue commanders. Like, I mean, there was Psy Master Thopterist from the year before that was just like a really great artifact-based commander.
Yeah, and it does compete in the space of there are a lot of artifact-based commanders, and there's even a newer one. We're not really going to talk about it, but Emery has done some things as well.
Right, yeah. And of course, those two are best friends in Modern right now. So
Yeah. And then we have Yawgmoth out of Modern Horizons, which also got a fair bit of hype.
this is everything you want on a card, right? It's removal, it's card draw, like
Yeah.
it's everything that you want. I think the thing about Yawgmoth as well is, yes, there are degenerate combos you can build into your decks, but you can build a perfectly fine like aristocrats deck with this thing. You don't have to go all in on it, and I think that black, it loves these kind of commanders that just do a bit of everything that black wants to do.
Yeah. And there's been a number of those. Like, I feel like Black got a lot of really interesting cards this year. Yawgmoth being one of them.
Yeah. Speaking of cards that we're not talking about in this episode, is it Ayara from Eldraine? The
Yeah.
yeah, she's kind of like Yawgmoth light.
Yeah.
Diet Yawgmoth.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Sir Conrad is also like very strong.
It's been a good year for black.
It's been a very good year for Black. Which brings us to our next card, which is also Black, out of Commander 2019, which was also super hyped, was Kirok.
Eric, the glass cannon.
Yeah. Again, for another 2-month period around the release of Commander 2019, all I heard was people saying, I want to build Kirok. I want to build Kirok. I want to build Kirok. And I have had the fortune of facing some Kirok decks. They can win very quickly.
Oh yeah, I was once sitting across from one that had Balthor the Defiled into the graveyard with Buried Alive, and like I think they put like Phyrexian Obliterator in there too, and some other paste.
Yeah.
That deck is like, it can do some really broken stuff really quick.
It can. Yeah. It's the question is, do you have Swords or Path on turn 1?
I think the other hyped card from Commander 2019, because I think like the rest of the cards, while they were interesting, they weren't like super stand out as hyped, but like the hype around Dockside Extortionist was real.
You know what's funny? I didn't actually catch that much hype for Dockside Extortionist. It wasn't until the set was actually out that I really kind of saw it taking off, but that might just be like a difference of like the circles that we run in.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, there was a lot of talk about this card straight away as being playable in most decks that want that kind of effect.
Yeah.
And there was also talk of it been playing even in Vintage.
I can see it. Shops is a deck in Vintage. There's a lot of artifacts in that deck.
Yeah, so like and the hype again, it's elevated the price. Like the Dockside Extortionist is one of the most valuable cards in Commander 2019.
Yeah, and for good reason. I mean, it's fast mana. Fast mana is always valuable in any format that it's legal in. So,
A good card.
yeah. Moving on from there, we get to Core Set 2020, and we've got a card that was very hyped, was cute at first, and but I am starting to get a little tired of it. That's Golos.
Good old Brolos. This thing is just like, I'm so bored of seeing it now. Like,
Yeah.
every player at the shop has just gone, right, well, here's my binder, here's Golos. I have a deck. Like it's just a good stuff like Commander. Like I've seen some really interesting like Maze's End decks that they try and like restrict the cards to like be like some kind of certain theme or deck building restriction, and those are the interesting ones. But unfortunately, there's just too many like generic good stuff Golos decks, and they just get a bit boring, right?
Yeah. Watch out for the Zakama. That one will wreck you.
Karma, that always wrecks you.
Yeah. Golos into Zakama. Awesome. It's going to be a fun game.
Speaking of overpowered cards, let's talk about Sultai cards.
Oh. You know how much I love Sultai. We've got Yarok the Desecrated, Panharmonicon on a stick. What are your thoughts on this one?
It's just good, right? Like this thing is everything that Sultai wants to do. It loves recurring creatures. It loves getting into the battlefield effects. So why not both? Why not two? Like
Yeah. I feel like they went a little too far. Like it's so easy to just build a really strong Yarok deck. It pains me a little bit inside. Like I wish there was some additional requirement, or maybe at least like made the mana cost a little higher.
yeah, or maybe just like giving it Death Touch and Lifelink. Like those are two powerful keywords.
They could have made it like a 3/3, so at least it dies to like random things. It's just so easy. Like it's so easy to just jam ETB creatures into a Yarok deck and go wild.
Hmm. Yeah. But you know, that's why it's the most hyped.
That is why it is the most hyped. So
People, believe it or not, like to win games of Magic.
what?
Speaking of people liking to win games of Magic, people will sometimes do anything to get those last little few points, those last little edges to make their decks better. Which is why we have a category of most overrated cards, because yeah, people will hype things into oblivion, and that's sometimes just not as good as you'd think.
Yeah, sometimes you think it's going to be the greatest thing ever, and it doesn't quite pan out. So we've got an entire category for those. You mentioned tiny edges. If you're trying to get a tiny edge, two cards you may look at are Fabled Passage and Prismatic Vista.
Like, you don't need them to win games of Commander. Like, these cards do so little for your strategy compared to the investment you'll make in them.
Right.
Like, if you open one, like, sure, you jam it in your deck. Definitely don't buy one. And if you do open one, I think you'd be better off just trading for like some better things that will improve your deck. Like having an untapped land is nice. So play a basic land and just play anything else that's worth like what, $15, $20 for Prismatic Vista, like maybe more. And
Right.
you could get so cool stuff for your deck that doesn't really do anything for you.
Right. I'm trying to build Najila right now, and like all of the win cons for that deck come to like $20.
Right. And Najila is like arguably one of the decks that would probably benefit the most from like one of these cards.
Right.
But even then, it's like unless you're running at like CDH level tables, do you even care?
Exactly. You know, unless every little fraction of a percentage point matters, and that's going to be tournament magic, you probably don't need Fabled Passage or Prismatic Vista. They are nice to have, but you know, for the investment, there are better places to spend your money to make your deck more effective.
Right. Right.
And we started to touch on these a little bit already for overrated cards. We did mention Ursa. Ursa's got my vote as the most overrated card this year because all I heard people talk about was Ursa. And when it actually came down to it, I watched good Ursa decks run into other good decks, and it usually lost. And maybe it was the hype factor, and people were like, oh, it's Ursa, I better shoot it. But when you run it against other very good decks, it didn't seem like it was actually that big of a deal. It didn't really seem like it was winning that many games.
That's interesting. I can't really comment for like the super high levels of play because that's not sort of my bread and butter. My impression is probably that, yeah, like if you're going for like those super high level decks, there are like tried and tested commanders that are probably just better. The lower end of the scale, like I think it suffers the problem of just painting too much of a target on its back, right?
Yeah, and and I think the hype actually worked against Urza a little bit right there because of that, because everyone's just like, well, I better shoot it.
It's the same as Yarok to an extent, right? Like
Yeah,
every time there's a Yarok deck at the table, even if they sit down and say, "I'm not running infinite combos," people are still gonna go, "Oh, there's a Yarok." Like,
yeah, and Feather also got some of that same treatment. I think it's died down a little bit, but it was definitely like there was a fair amount of cast Feather turn 3 right into a swords or a path, and you're like, well, this sucks.
yeah,
But
yeah.
But with Urza, the one thing is that like if you played against casual decks or even just like, like probably like mid power decks, it's going to be a headache for those. It's when you're talking about like evenly matched decks, I don't think Urza actually competes all that well, but if you're talking about Urza playing decks that are weaker than itself, it's probably going to beat up on them pretty good.
Yeah, because the things that are going to make the Urza deck good are the things that kind of encroach on the social contract of Commander, so like stacks and things like that.
Right, one-sided winter orb.
Yeah.
Moving on from that,
Yeah,
we've
the
got
next category is pretty interesting.
we've got biggest sleeper cards.
So the thing in Magic is played by so many people around the world that to a lot of people these won't be sleepers because the people they talk to most of the time will have either identified these cards as good or they'll be a known entity. So there are very few real sleepers in Magic. The last main one I can remember is like I think when Guilds of Ravnica came out, like everyone was like Arclight Phoenix is trash, and then obviously it's not. And there was like suddenly all these people came out the woodwork that were like, oh, I bought 50 at 99 cents. It's like, sure you did, whatever. So when we say sleeper, it's kind of cards that we know, like they're definitely playable. But it's cards that we don't see very often, or that we'll get the appreciation for just how much of an impact they can have on a game.
Right.
The first one I'd like to talk about is the card that we spoke briefly about a few weeks ago. It's Ugin the Ineffable. It's just such a great Magic card. Like it destroys target opponent that's one or more colors. So it can fit into lots of decks that don't tend to be able to do that for a start.
That's enchantment removal
Sorry.
for colors that don't have enchantment removal.
Right, which is very, very strong. It's also like the ability to reduce the cost of artifacts by 2 means that like anything from like an Elsha of the Infinite deck that wants to cast Divining Top for free, to equipment-based Voltron decks, to other artifact-based decks, like this thing just slots in so many places. And then on top of that, you've got the card advantage of a nice little blocker that turns into a card. Like this does everything.
I probably need to get a couple copies of this, honestly. Listening to you talk about it, I'm like, oh, these are all things I want.
It's definitely an underrated card. I don't see people playing it enough, and I think it just does a lot of work.
So I've seen it a handful of times, and when I do see it, it is very impressive. I definitely agree that this is a card that probably needs to see more play, and it's really, really good value.
Yeah, I think like the ceiling on this is like, I was playing it in Akiri Bruce for a while with Mystic Forge, and I was just like, right, I'll look at all these equipments I can cast off the top of my deck for free. I've got Sigarda's Aid in play. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum.
Oh, I want to do that. I want to do that now.
So good.
So yeah, Ugin is very, very sweet. Moving on from Ugin, we've got Mausoleum Secrets. I feel like this is a big sleeper. This is an instant speed tutor for 2 mana.
Mausoleum Secrets, that's one I'm not as familiar with. Do you want to just read that one to me? As an aside, mainly because I feel like most of the listeners won't know what it is.
Yeah, this one's such a big sleeper that no one actually knows what it is, except like Abzan and green black players. But so Mausoleum Secrets is 1 and a black for an instant, has Undergrowth. Search your library for a black card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle your library. That is an instant speed tutor that finds black cards.
So I think the reason a lot of people are turned off this is because it does require a little bit of setup.
Sure. And
that said,
once that setup's achieved, you have an instant speed demonic tutor for black cards.
which is just everything you want, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you just like you end step into the thing you need to either like wipe the board or win the game, do whatever, seems pretty good. Black decks do care a lot about their graveyards, so it seems very reasonable that you're going to have some number of creatures in there. Where it's really at home is going to be like green, black, and Abzan, like thinking like Carador deck or something like that. but the card is inherently powerful. It is an instant speed tutor. Yes, there's a condition there, but there's so much upside on an instant speed tutor.
Right, and I think that much like with Green Sun Zenith, you can get a Dryad Arbor to ramp you if you just have nothing better to do. This does get Living End. If there's nothing else in your yard, you can get Living End. Like,
we'll do that.
That aside, there's plenty of 1-mana black cards this can also get that are playable. So like the other thing is, like, at 1 mana, you can grab Dark Ritual.
Yeah.
Like,
why not?
There's ways to make this work to keep you going in the game, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Or you do the classic tutor for a tutor, end step tutor for demonic tutor, then demonic tutor on your turn, or vampiric tutor even, and then you can really get the thing you want.
Definitely thinning the deck, PJ. It's definitely thinning the deck.
I've seen people make plays similar to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got a tutor for a tutor. Moving on from that one, next we have Fallen Shinobi.
I love
What
this
are your
card.
thoughts on this one?
So, like, anytime a Magic card says you can cast a card for free is when you should be excited, right? Fallen Shinobi does this by either hitting an opponent or using ninjutsu to get it in there to hit an opponent. Lets you cast the top 2 cards of their deck that turn for free. Like, that's insane card advantage.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I completely missed this card, and I'm pretty sure I did a Modern Horizons review at some point earlier in the year. May have even talked about it at that point, but like just completely forgot about it. And like you said, you should always take note of when a card says cast things without paying their mana cost.
And sometimes you will kind of have an idea of the top of someone's library. Like, if they scry, there's a good card sometimes. If they've played Divining Top or like Sylvan Library, sometimes like they will order the cards so that there's the good card on top. Best case scenario, sometimes what the top card is.
Oh yeah.
So
Oracle of Moldiah.
like, there are ways to take advantage of this, right? Like,
yeah.
I was in a game the other week with where I was playing Italy, and I knew what the top card of my opponent's deck was. It was an Artisan of Kozilek, and I was just like, this is Christmas.
Here we go.
It's great. But yeah, like anything that says play stuff for free, it's great. This thing is Dimir as well, it's a nice creature to have in Dimir, especially if you're playing like a Silas Ren deck or something similar. Maybe like a Ninjutsu deck, obviously. It's obviously going to go in a Ninja's deck, right?
Yeah.
But even then, like, I think outside of a Ninja's deck, it's good card advantage.
Yeah. Again, it's just, casting things for free. Like in your case, I think I'll have this Artisan of Kozilek now. And, Oracle of Moldiah is a really popular card. So there are plenty of reasons why you might know what's on top of your library.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah. The Oracle. There's lots of reasons. I would like to go on for this section is Kaya's Guile.
Yeah.
If we could get away with playing Guile's theme here, I think we would, but we'll probably get copy striked.
We definitely would. We definitely would.
Guile. This card, right? So I opened a foil one when the set came out, and I looked at it and I was like, I'll probably find a home for this at some point. And I didn't really take note of the fact it was like as good as it is now. But like, having played with this card, like, I really like it. It's very strong. Do you want to just like read out the modes?
Yeah, so Kaya's Guile. 3 mana, choose 2. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. Exile all cards from each opponent's graveyard. That's the one that I really like. Create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying, or you gain 4 life, and you can pay 3 to entwine it, and choose all the modes.
Yeah, I think the thing I like the most about this card is that, like all modal cards like this, it resolves in the order of the modes. So when they sacrifice the creature, it will be exiled if that was the other mode you chose.
Right. And, for Commander, I think the Edict effect and the Graveyard Exile are probably going to be the 2 most relevant consistently. But you never know when you need a chump blocker or you need to gain some life randomly to like an Alpha Strike or a big burn spell or something like that. So
I think there's something to be said as well for the fact that an Edict or Graveyard Hate sometimes aren't worth a whole card.
Right.
In the sense that I would rather run like Scavenger Grounds in my mana base or Volcanic Offering because it removes 2 creatures and 2 lands.
Yeah.
Because like those sorts of things like land destruction and Graveyard Hate, Edicts, they're not generally worth a full card. Like you see them most often like on creatures because you get a body with it. So having the flexibility here, I think, is very, very strong.
Right. And, where it's become super relevant for me, and probably for you as well, is with Sir Gwyn, Hero of Ashvale, where now you're talking about Sunforger and Marduk's Sunforger package. And it was a card I had in there for a little while, and I've had a lot of debate about whether Rakdos Charm or Kaya's Guile. And it's been really interesting trying to figure out that puzzle, because Kaya's Guile just gives you a lot of options and
I
a lot of
think
things.
it's a Gwen. I think I'd probably go for the Guile just because with the Menace, Edict is quite strong.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a great point.
Yeah, I like how you're thinking. Sunforger, right?
Yeah, let's Sunforger this bad boy. And I'd have to check this out. I think you can entwine off of Sunforger.
I do not think you can.
I believe if it's an additional cost, you're able to do it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We
Judge?
should look at that.
Yeah.
If you fetch this Kaya's Guile with Sunforger, you can pay the entwine cost.
You can.
Yeah.
Let's get all 4 modes. Let's go. Moving on from that. So our next sleeper is Sword of Sinew and Steel. I was really hot on this one at first, but I noticed I haven't been playing it quite as much as I probably should be. What are your thoughts, Ben, on this one?
Sword of Sinew and Steel. So, like, this is an interesting one for me. Most that have been in equipment-based decks, and it's kind of awkward, like, because a lot of equipment decks nowadays, like, you've got the fact that you can be playing Bruce and Akiri, and Bruce is red, and also like Embercleave is a new card that is red. So like if you start to add up all these like pro-red effects, you can be in a situation where sometimes like you can't do both, which it kind of means that your deck building has to take that into consideration.
Right.
I do think though that after having played with Sword of Sinew and Steel, the ability to just blow up a Planeswalker, no matter who you've hit, is just so good.
Yeah. And I also really like the artifact thing too, especially because if you're talking about, like, let's say a Gilded Lotus. Gilded Lotus is like a very good card that goes pretty unnoticed, I feel like. And if you're blowing that up, you're going to keep your opponent off that big turn a very long time.
Right.
But as you point out, destroying any Planeswalker, regardless of who you hit, is a big deal because you know that Planeswalker player is like pillow forted up and you probably can't get to them.
Right. And I think that you made a point earlier as well that players don't tend to run too much Planeswalker-based removal in their decks. So cards that can hit Planeswalkers in their sort of, like destroy target permanent, for example, or
Right.
non-land permanent, those cards tend to be saved for things like Planeswalkers, right? So the fact that you've got this, it's repeatable as well. Very strong.
Yeah. And the other thing too, the pro red is awkward in some decks, especially Akiri Bruce. It is a little bit awkward with something like Embercleave. However, it does give you protection from Blasphemous Act, which is in like every single red deck. So you can either protect your creature from your own Blasphemous Act or protect yourself from an opponent's Blasphemous Act. So there is still a lot of upside there, even though it does get a little bit awkward with certain builds. Initially, I ranked that one very highly when I did my ranking of the swords video a long time ago. And another issue that I've noticed is that it does compete. You can only have so many swords at 3 and 2. Like there's just your deck only supports so many of those. Finding room for it can be an issue, especially if you have access to Feast and Famine and Fire and Ice. If you don't, it's probably a much easier thing to slot in. You're not fighting over that same space, but
I think that's a really good point. My Sigwin deck, I've kind of gone for the option of, I like to compare it to having a 6-shooter. Like, you only have 6 bullets in the barrel, but they will just deal with anything. So I've gone for like, all of the utter ends, the anguished unmakings, the generous gifts. I've gone for like the most like universal answers I can because I'm just like, I have these 6 bullets and I will make them count. Like,
right, yeah, they will always hit something.
So yeah, in a deck like that, like I'd much rather just drop a Feast and Famine, as most people would.
Right. But the reason that it's on our sleeper list is I think I need to play it more. I think other people need to play it a bit more, especially if you're in a meta where games are going to go just a little bit longer. If you're looking like more than 8 turns, when you're talking about turn 9, turn 10, blowing up people's stuff is a really good place to be. Moving
Okay.
on from that, we've got Backdraft Hellkite. Many of you are probably saying, what? So I'm going to read this one. Backdraft Hellkite was in Commander 2019. It's 3 red for a 4/4 with flying. Whenever it attacks, each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to the mana cost. What are your thoughts on this?
So the reason I think this is a sleeper is because it suffers a little from a lot of the same problems that some of the more spicy like cards in the last few years suffer from, which is you have to untap with it and get a swing, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing as like playing Italy Primal Storm. Like that thing really, like, unless you untap with it and swing, it's like it's a lot of mana to pour down the drain. As a rule, I do not like to run too many cards that don't have an impact the turn they come down.
Right.
And I think that's just a general rule that will improve your deck building. But this card has a very interesting effect. Like, lore on it is like pretty good. Like you get to double tap on all of your removal. You get to double tap on your card draw. Just that extra bit of value that it gives you. And I think sometimes it's small enough to fly under the radar too. Like if you don't have anything like super exciting in your yard, you can just eke out a little bit of value.
Yeah. The fact that, like, this card wasn't on my radar before an hour ago means that I'm probably not spending removal on it. And, as long as you don't just like lose the game to something in the period of time you need to untap, you're probably going to get a chance to use it. So,
Or you just play it in Chainer, which it has haste, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, play it in Chainer.
Because that's the deck I've been trying it in, and being able to just fire off a second like Night's Whisper to draw a couple more cards, or fire off a second Volcanic Offering, or fire off a second
I think I'll wheel it for you.
Fortune. Like there's just so many nice like value plays that you can do with this thing.
I think it's important to point out also that it says each instant and sorcery, so it can literally be all of them.
And you don't have to target at the time as well, which is nice.
Yeah, so like targeted graveyard removal isn't something that you would need to worry about so much.
Just your whole yard going.
Yeah, your whole yard going is obviously a problem. But if there's some like, there's that new green one that it's like naturalized, but it can exile a card from a graveyard. So like,
Is it Return to Nature?
Yeah, that's the one. But yeah, I like this thing. I actually want to go try it out now. That's just been added to my to-do list.
Nice. I look forward to it.
Sweet.
One on this section is Sudden Substitution. Now this is a bit of a complicated card, so I'll go through it. It's 2 and 2 blue, so 4 mana for an instant. It has split second, so no one can respond to your shenanigans. When it's cast, you exchange control of target non-creature spell, so that is a spell that is on the stack and hasn't yet to be resolved, and target creature. Then the spell's controller may choose new targets for it. So the short print of that is essentially someone casts a spell, you play this, you take control of the spell and give them one of your creatures. However, that's not how it has to play out. You can do this to mess with opponents' turns as well. So if you want to play the politics game, you can exchange control of one opponent's spell with another opponent's creature.
Ooh.
The possibilities for this card are like, I wouldn't go as far as endless, but there are a lot of them. Like there's ways you can like really interfere with people's boards with this.
Right.
The like any spell that sort of sets the power and toughness of your creatures to like X, you just cast that for 0 and then give the opponent the spell. You've board wiped them in blue, which is a color that can't do that.
Right. I'm thinking about the big finisher spell, like someone's going to tap out for a Torment of Hailfire or Rise of the Dark Realms, something like that. And it's like, well, I guess I'll just take that now. And I don't think there's actually anything they can do about it. You probably just win now. Took a Torment. For
right. Because it's
6-15.
split second.
Right.
It's crazy. It's so good.
Yeah.
Like
I was gonna say, you want what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Perplexing Chimera a little bit, which is like a nightmare of a card to try and play around. It's just like you're like, all right, how do I get the thing to resolve? But there's just like a lot of ramifications, and it really stops someone from being able to like make some big blowout kind of play, like the Torment of Hellfire.
I was gonna say, like, you can't just give someone like a demonic pact. Like it's a non-creature spell.
Yep, that it is.
Cool stuff you can do with this card, I think.
Yeah, it's really wide open. You never know when you're gonna need to steal a spell. So pretty interesting. I kind of want to try this one out too.
Yeah, like I think like could you imagine being in a scenario where there is a clear arch enemy at the table, and they're swinging at one of your other players that you actually want to keep alive, and they have like a combat trick or a removal spell during combat, and you're like, right, okay, well, I'm gonna give one of my blockers to my allied opponent, or like give them a creature, and then change the targets of the spell. Like, there's so many cool political things you could get up to with this card.
Oh yeah, I've got a headache just thinking about them. Like,
Right.
how do I make this work? So if you're, if you're very much a blue player and you're used to these kind of effects, there's going to be some really interesting ways you can twist this card. Next up, we've got the most impactful cards from this year.
Yeah, so these are the cards that we think have had either the most impact on the format because of what they offer for the format, or just the most impact because of like how hyped they are and how they've changed the way people build decks. I guess the best place to start is to carry on the conversation about Golos and include his kind of alter ego in a sense, Niv Mizzet Reborn.
So I was telling you about this before the cast, is that the Niv Mizzet decks I've seen are just like removal fests of draw 4 or 5, 6 cards, and just it's a handful of removal all the time. You're just constantly getting card advantage, and you can find your opponents out like no other.
I've played against some very, very strong Niv Mizzet decks, and as much as some people like to play, quote unquote good stuff, I don't know, like, I guess you can justify it in the sense in that, yes, you are building to a deck building restriction, but it's still just a deck full of like, well, I'm going to dig 10 cards deep to answer whatever's on the board, and we're going to sit here all night.
Yeah. There was a game on my channel a while ago where I got knocked out and I was just watching Niv Mizzet and someone else go at it for a while. And just the value is just so hard to answer. And a lot of times, like, as long as you're not getting attacked by it, the safest place for Niv Mizzet is in play, because the ability for them to just recast it, you're just like, well, they're going to get 5 more cards. It's going to be bad.
Right. And like, the thing is, usually they'll wait till like turn 7 or 8 to cast it, or until they have that much mana.
Right.
And then in that first 10 cards, they will take Absorb or Dovin's Veto. And then it's like, well, good luck removing it. Like...
Yeah. Yeah, Niv Mizzet, it can do some crazy things.
So yeah, the reason I mentioned it alongside Golos is because I think it's had an impact on deck building. I've seen a lot of these decks. To me, like, this is just an opinion. I think a lot of the time they're quite lazy. It's just a lot of the time it's players going, right, well, here's all my cool in a binder that I can't fit anywhere else. Let's just build a deck, which, sometimes that's fine. Like, you do you. But it gets boring to play against the same decks all the time, right?
Yeah, it does.
And I realize the irony of saying that if I've just said that people throw their binders into a deck. So don't attack me too much in the comments.
But yeah, the one that I'm sick of more than anything else is Golos.
It was cute at first. Now I'm very, very sick of it. You always have to take note when there's a Golos player at the table. Like, you play Golos, you get the land you need most, you activate that ability, and you've got, assuming you don't whiff, you've got crazy stuff to cast. You can cast big spells, things like Time Stretch. You can cast Eldrazi, Zakama, stuff like that, way earlier than they should ever be cast.
Right. And I think the other thing with Golos is as well that lands are very powerful these days. They keep printing very powerful lands and powerful effects on lands. And one of the things that balances that out is that there are relatively few ways to find the lands that you need. There's Expedition Map. There's, if you're in green, you've got a few more ways to do it. You can use an unconditional tutor in black, I guess. But generally speaking, there's not that many ways to find the exact lands that you want.
No.
If you put all of those in a 5-color deck with the commander that can dig for them too, you are getting so much value off like one of the hardest to interact with permanent types of Magic.
Yeah. And that's really the issue. The issue is that a Golos deck is going to generate absurd amounts of mana. It's going to find all the lands it needs. And unless you want to be that person that's bringing Winter Orb to the table, it's really hard to interact with someone who just has a lot of land.
Right, because people don't run enough strip mines anyway. And when land destruction is frowned on, it's like this deck just has free reign, right?
Right, exactly. And I think that's what makes Golos strong. There's a couple things that make Golos strong, but one of them is it's just really difficult to interact with their strategy. And the other being that I mentioned already is that they're casting hugely powerful spells way earlier than they should be. So those two things combined makes Golos just really, really powerful. Also to point out, this is going to be more of a Magic Online thing because of cost, but Mishra's Workshop is a card that you can tutor with Golos.
This is true.
Also, Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. Those are things that you can get.
Technically, yes. And that many players who want to build Golos will probably want to proxy at some point. But that's
Right.
another discussion, right?
Yeah.
So the next card that is hugely impactful for me is Smothering Tithe, mainly because it's changed the way I play Boros decks.
Yeah. This has got my vote for
Most impactful card this year.
it just does everything. Like, it's so unbelievably powerful.
The thing is, you run away with games with this card quite easily. And
You do.
I think people have now gotten to the point where they know that they should blow it up, and it gets blown up, and that's fine, and it's answerable. And one of the things that I think makes it fair in that sense is that it is quite answerable. But yeah, like, if you just get to stick this, you can, like, it's often said that the player who spends the most mana wins a game of Magic. Nowhere is that more true than with Smothering Tithe.
Yeah. If you're talking about a situation that's like you resolve Smothering Tithe, someone's got a Sylvan Library in play, no one pays for anything, you can basically cast the things you need to win the game on the following turn. It may take you a couple turns after that point, but like the turn where you like effectively win the game could be turn 5 or even sooner if
Right.
you use mana.
And like, I mean, I know that you can go crazy with it with like wheels and things, and that's like, like that wins games.
That it does.
But like, I noticed another nice interaction with it is that Anointed Procession will create 2 treasures.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. That is a good one.
I was playing my Alayla Artful Provocateur Enchantress Fairies Esper build, testing it. And I had the Anointed Procession out and I played the Smothering Tithe, and my opponent just looked at me and I was like, what? And I was like, oh!
Yep.
That does a thing. So yeah, that's a really nice interaction too. And I think what you said about it just being able to cast things ahead of curve is what really makes it good. Like, you can cast something like a Avacyn Angel of Hope way earlier than you should be able to, and hold up interaction.
Yep. For me, Smothering Tithe does a couple things. Obviously, we talked about the wheels. We talked about it puts you ahead, but it also, people will shoot it. And rightfully so. It's immensely powerful. But the thing to keep in mind is that even if it gets shot, that's a piece of artifact and enchantment removal that's not getting used on something else. In like the case of you or me, that's probably a sort of feast and famine that we're trying to keep alive. And, decks don't have unlimited artifact and enchantment removal. So if they're shooting the Smothering Tithe, it's probably playing the bodyguard role for something else that we want to keep alive, like a feast and famine.
And that is exactly what happened in that game when I was testing Alayla. It got blown up, and then I drew into Divine Visitation, and they had no removal left.
Yeah.
And I had enough mana to do silly things.
Yeah.
It's a good card. It's a great card. I love it so much. I've taken now, when I was at the GP, we made a bit of a meme of it, and on players' upkeeps, I would take my dice bag and just shake it and cough.
Nice. I want to try that now. Now, the other side of that card is that yesterday I was playing and someone had a Smothering Tithe in play, and I was staring at not 1, but 2 wheels in my hand that I could not play because it was going to be real bad if I did. So it's a card where you start to think about, like, is it too powerful? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
I think it's fine. It's 4 mana. I think it's fine.
And I generally agree with that. The only reason that, like, I even bring it up is that, like, other colors get really powerful cards all the time. White doesn't usually get them. I think it's just because it's so much more powerful than things that white is used to getting that the question sort of enters people's mind.
That's fair.
And as one last quick point, one really, really nasty thing that you can do with Smothering Tithe is play a stasis and keep getting mana to keep paying for stasis. I hope none of you ever have to run into that, but it's a thing that can happen.
That sounds horrid.
Yeah, there's someone in my group that does that.
Wow. So moving on, we have Bolas' Citadel, which is a card we've already talked about, so I don't want to go too deep on it. It's had an impact in the sense that it's another win condition for a lot of black decks that now have access to like Storm kind of thing. Yeah. When you combine this with an Aetherflux Reservoir, like eventually the life loss will balance out to the point where you can just then make a fully operational battle station.
And I've seen people get down there pretty far. They're at like 3 or 4 life before the Aetherflux hits or it becomes impactful enough. And you're like, come on, and run out of gas, and they don't. And then you cry. But
But yeah, I think we've kind of covered most of this card already.
Yeah, it's strong, it's fun, card advantage, it's a combo piece, it's a finisher if you want. Really, really cool, impactful card. Moving on from that, we've got Narset's Reversal. Have you seen this one in action at all?
So I've seen it in action played by people, not me. Partially because I've only just picked one up, and partially because I don't tend to play enough decks where it matters. Because I
Right.
think this thing is like a new tool in the toolbox for any deck that needs to resolve very specific combinations of cards to win.
Yep.
It gives you a second chance. It can give you second copies of cards. It can allow you to then recast certain cards. I've seen people put this thing under an Isochron Scepter and do very, very silly things. It's just very, very strong. It has a very unique effect, and I don't think people have fully figured out like just what you can do with this. I think there's going to be always a lot of creativity and design that you can do with this.
Right. The first time I saw it resolve, I'm like, wait, that's not a card. And I'm like, oh my God, this is dumb. And then I got a chance to play it, and I found that a really powerful thing you can do is just Narset's Reversal your own turn spell.
That's very strong.
Yeah, and then take 2 extra turns. Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Speaking of 2-mana blue spells,
Yep.
shall we talk about Dovin's Veto?
We shall. If you want to win the counterspell war, Dovin's Veto is how you do it.
I'm going to veto that because one of my favorite blue cards can deal with this, and that is Summary Dismissal. Summary
Really?
Dismissal is a card that doesn't see enough play. It's an Eldritch Moon counterspell that costs 4 mana, which is probably why. But it exiles all spells and all abilities that are on the stack.
Ah, so it doesn't counter it at exile.
It doesn't target, and it doesn't counter. But like,
Excellent.
man, like that card's so sick at like disrupting combos because they don't get the spell back, and any triggers go away.
That one definitely doesn't see enough play. Also, it's one of the few things that like stops Emrakul and the trigger.
Right, and I mean, I could get on a soapbox and talk about that card, but I won't because that's not what we're here for.
Right. But yeah, I've been seeing a lot of Dovin's Veto, and when you're getting into that counterspell battle and you need to get something through, Dovin's Veto is probably the one that's going to get you there, unless they have Summary Dismissal.
Right, and the thing that I think is important about this card is that, generally speaking, you cast this spell, they're unlikely to have more mana to interact further with the stack because it's so cheap. Because one of the ways you can get around these types of spells is by retargeting the original spell rather than the veto, or you can like make your spell fizzle, or like there's different tricksy things you can do to get around the fact that you can't counter the veto itself.
Right.
But yeah, like it's still very, very strong to have a sort of quote unquote unconditional counter spell.
Right.
Because it's not unconditional, is it? But like, it's still very strong.
Right. Yeah, you're gonna find a place to use it in a game, for sure.
It's one of the cards Niv Mizzet can grab.
That it can. It can also grab this next card, which is Rhythm of the Wild. I see a ton of this card. Like I see it in pretty much every deck that can support it. And yeah.
I mean, you do have to announce this card with the appropriate 90s homage.
I'll let you do that.
I don't think I will. We'll get copy striked. But yeah, Rhythm of the Wild. It's so good. Like anything that says your creature spells can't be countered is like super playable, right?
Right. And
Vexing Shusher, is it? Vexing Shusher, the little
Shusher, yep.
That thing sees like great amounts of play in decks like Xenagos, and just having this on an enchantment, which is a lot harder to interact with, and be able to give your creatures haste. It's like, what?
Yeah. So in my opinion, Fervor is a card that doesn't get run enough. And I think haste is still pretty undervalued as an ability. And now you're talking about having haste and can't be countered. It's just like everything you want in a creature deck.
Right. And haste, as at least we've kind of championed before, it's one of the most important abilities to put on like Voltron-based commanders, because you're very unlikely to get to untap with them. And haste in general, like a similar card that I like to run in Gerard, Weatherlight Hero, is Hammer of Perforos.
Yep.
Because it's an artifact and it gives haste and you can get it back. But haste is very strong. Yeah, like this card's great.
Right. I wish I had Rhythm of the Wild for my Gerard deck because the thing I'm most worried about is getting countered. And unfortunately, Rhythm just like isn't in those colors. But yeah, I see it in like most creature decks that can support it. And it will gain even more value the bigger the creature you want to cast. So if you're trying to play like dragons or something like that, you really don't want one of your dragons getting countered because it's just, losing 6 or 7 mana into a 2 mana spell just feels awful. So Rhythm of the Wild, really, really good. Gains value as your creatures get bigger.
Mhm. The next card is like part of a kind of I kind of want to call it a systemic problem in Magic now, which is 3 mana planeswalkers that just do too much.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that is a systemic
the
problem.
the other ones, like I think, are less impactful. The only one that I think in EDH is as impactful as this is perhaps the Small Teferi, the one that forces your opponents to play at sorcery speed, because that thing in like any sort of combo deck is just great.
Yeah, you can lock people out with like Knowledge Pool with that.
Mhm. But the one that you've selected, I think, is probably more of an egregious threat.
So that's going to be Narset Parter of Veils. It says each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. It's basically Leovold 2.0. And the
Right.
activated ability doesn't even matter that much because that's not what people care about. I see this card a lot. And
It's weird because I think that as much as like you're about to tell us about the decks that it really works and does a lot of work in, I see it just crop up as like just a generic card in a lot of people's decks. And it's like they just see the fact that the opponents can't draw more than 1 card and they're like, sweet, I'll put it in my control deck. And it's like
Yep.
it's so annoying because that makes it such an ubiquitous card. It pops up everywhere.
Yeah. This is like a $3 uncommon, by the way. That's worth noting. Like most uncommons don't reach $3 or $4. That's not a thing you see.
Kind of like the uncommon cryptic command, which is Summer's Veil, is it?
Yeah. It's such a scary card, especially if you know your opponent's playing wheels. Because then you're just on guard, like, well, if they untap with it and a wheel happens, I lose my hand and the game's probably over.
Because like what self-respecting Nekuzar deck doesn't put this in?
Right, exactly.
The only reason you wouldn't put it in is because of the whole social contract thing with Commander.
Right.
But like it's such a good card for that deck that you really have to be really content with hamstringing yourself to not play it. Like
Yeah. And I mean, it does other, like you talked about, it just does other things. Like if you just shut down value from someone, if you've got a green player with like Beast Whisperer or a Guardian Project, something like that, she'd be like, nope, not drawing those extra cards. But the top end is worrying about the wheel and worrying about losing your hand.
I very much wish this was a white card.
Like, I think this is a much safer and better card in white because white doesn't have natural access to wheels where blue does, even though they're generally expensive.
right. And making it double white to cast would also make it a lot harder to cast in decks that were splashing the white.
Right, exactly. Now that I've thought about it, like I just want this card in white. Just like print me a white enchantment with this ability on it because it's a thing that white needs badly, and it wasn't a thing that blue really needed all that much.
True, true. It does bring us nicely onto the last of our most impactful cards, though, which is something that White very much appreciated this year. And that card is Savine's Reclamation.
Yes. This is basically a Sun Titan trigger on a sorcery, and it's got flashback.
Nice
And
part about it, though, is that when you flash it back, you get to copy it.
you get 2. Yeah, so you and I have talked about this card a bit. The more I play it, the more I like it. I was fooling around with the deck the other day that was doing a graveyard thing, and when you can Savine's Reclamation and animate dead or a necromancy, it's pretty crazy.
Right. There's just so many applications for it. Like, especially like, for example, if someone mills you, like
Yeah.
the thing I like to do with this card sometimes as well is like, if I've got a draw and discard or a looting effect, I'm quite happy to pitch this card into the yard.
Yeah, 100%.
And it does a lot for the whole card advantage issue in white because oftentimes your game will center on some of those most impactful cards, and having a way to get them back not once but twice is just amazing.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you about a sweet line that came up for me the other day. I was playing Sir Gwyn. Someone hit me with a Traumatize effect. I put half my library into the graveyard. And then I pulled out Blackblade Reforged, Duelist Heritage, and Luxodon Warhammer. And it didn't take too long, but the game ended shortly after that.
Right. It's just that good. It's that good.
Yeah, it was insane. Like, it's so, so good. Worst case scenario is like you pay 3 and get a fetch land and you ramp yourself a little.
Right. So this thing can bring back like a myriad landscape. It's a bit slow, but it does
Right,
the
it's
job,
slow.
right? I think that was how I started one of my games recently. Like my hand was like super slow, but I was like, it works. I'm gonna do it.
Yep.
This card I picked up, like I pre-ordered a couple of extra copies. I kind of like was not as high on it to begin with, so I ended up putting one in my trade folder, but I've just fished it out again recently because the more I play with it, the more I love this card.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. Just like every time I play it, I'm like, oh my god, this card is so good. But then I think I'm like, this is why I love Sun Titan. This is more Sun Titan. This card is great.
Would you like bacon with your bacon?
Yes, I want more bacon with my bacon, and I want bacon with my Sun Titan.
So bacon is just so good, right? I mean, it's Thanksgiving for you guys, right? So like what do you put bacon on with Thanksgiving? Do you add bacon to anything? Like we're really big on bacon when it comes to Christmas dinners.
Historically, my family does not, but you know, there are many bacon wrapped items that you can find in the US. Uh, we had some bacon wrapped dates the other night, not specifically a Thanksgiving thing.
Bacon
Um,
wrap dates.
yeah, I think Veronica made bacon wrapped. It was like bacon and Brussels sprouts one year, which is like, you know, taking something awesome with something terrible and mixing it together. And
Then you
I
just
still
end up with something that's perfectly fine.
I still didn't enjoy it, but you know, I'm just like, well, maybe we just make the bacon and put the cheese on that instead, and just skip the Brussels sprouts altogether, and I'd be perfectly happy with that.
I think the best thing are those little chipolata sausages that are wrapped in bacon. They're great.
I don't know if I've ever had one of those.
They're just like tiny little sausages wrapped in bacon. They're great.
Huh? Sounds good.
But yeah, I think lest we sit and talk about food for hours, which I can always do, we're probably close to wrapping up for today, I imagine.
Yeah, we should do that. Let's wrap it up. So I think you had one more thing you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I thought it'd be a fun little sign off if we talked about the new secret lair product that Wizards has sprung on us out of nowhere.
So I didn't even really know about this product. I saw a few people tweet about it, and then like I just looked it up fairly recently. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. They're selling like essentially specialty promos of very select cards.
Yeah, there's some really interesting sort of approaches here. I think Wizards are testing the waters. Personally, for the ones like revealed, there's none that I'm gonna like snap one and definitely want to buy. But some of them do look pretty nice. Like the Dragon's very cool.
Yeah, your dragon is certainly cool, and the ones they printed are all pretty high demand type commanders, at least in my opinion. So, you know, someone's gonna want them, which to me also means they're probably going to be pretty expensive once they, you know, go out of print and are on the secondary market.
Yeah, I agree. I think the interesting thing is that they will probably do more of these, and it seems that they're trying them as sort of like a drop approach. So, like a lot of companies now will sort of go, right, you've got 24 hours to buy this product. Here's really short notice. Buy it, buy it, buy it.
Right.
And I think
Bye.
yes. So I'd be interested to see what they come up with. So for the sign off, I thought it'd be interesting to ask you what would be in your ideal secret lair product.
I had to think about this for a minute, and then I kind of just came to the 3 cards that I always play. That's Stoneforge Mystic, Sunforger, and Sword of Feast and Famine. But if the value of that is like way too high, which it certainly is, you could probably throw like a Sword of the Animist in there because they use that in like every single deck.
Yeah. I think my product would probably be quite similar to yours. They could also put in like Mask of Memory, Enlightened Tutor.
Ooh, yeah, those are good ones. Those would be good ones.
Those are good ones too. But I think so. It's interesting because like the cards we've selected would probably be on our list of kind of like, you know, they're doing these like signature spell books for like green that's coming out next year.
Right.
I think perhaps like an equipment spell book would probably be a great place for these.
Yes, I would love an equipment spell book.
So in the interest of that, I think maybe if we're just looking at it purely from a here's some cool artwork perspective, I'd really like to see some sort of stained glass stuff, maybe for some of the cooler angels in Magic. That would be pretty cool.
I'm not as big on the stained glass stuff. Like I've gotten some stained glass altars because those are like definitely in right now, and I've also found a number of them on eBay. So like they are cool, but I'm also starting to be over them a little bit. So
Right.
I'm not so much into the stained glass thing, but I guess that's all like personal preference.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, just give me a Sunforger that is an actual sword and looks like the sword of X and Y series, and I'll be happy.
I think it's cool that it's a hammer, but like I would definitely take some new art on Sunforger. Maybe make it like, I guess it's already a
like
flaming hammer.
like a
but, like
javelin or something.
more flames, needs more fire.
Yeah, like a huge throwing spear or something. I don't know.
But yeah, I would definitely take some new art on Sunforger, and that would be totally cool.
Right. Well, that's been it for us for today. Giving plans.
Yeah, we're having some family over. I got to clean the house in a little bit.
Well,
What
I
about you?
mean,
What about you? You celebrate Thanksgiving, right?
we celebrate. I use the term celebrate lightly, but we've imported Black Friday, but we've not imported the turkey dinner. So, you know.
What? Next, you're going to tell me how
Yeah.
to celebrate the 4th of July.
Nope.
That's a history
mean-
joke for those keeping score at home.
Yeah. No need to throw your tea out the boat just yet.
Save the tea. I drink tea. You can't be wasting all that tea.
Yeah, I mean, I just finished a coffee, so I think that'll do me for now. But I do like a good cup of tea. Cheers, PJ. I'll catch you soon.
Anyway, yes, let's cut it off here. Thank you all for joining us for this edition of the podcast. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving if you celebrate.
I'm good, PJ. I'm good. If it's the 3rd second, does that divide down to 1.5?
I think it might. Our numerical system is it's in flux right now.
It is.
How do numbers even work?
Let's be honest. I mean, it's you guys that don't pluralize math.
You pluralize math?
Yeah, it's maths, right?
Not over here.
You shorten it mathematics to maths because it's like plural.
No, blasphemy.
Blasphemy indeed.